Bullets That Changed America. 13 Historic Assassinations, Duels, Misfires, and Murders. Available from McFarland Publishing, wherever books are sold. Now, back to our show. This is Peter.
And this is Tom.
And you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to our podcast. Tommy, what do we got?
Well, today we're going to look at our part two, discussing a little bit of history of baseball. Again, we're breezing through this pretty fast, so obviously I don't want people to be like, oh, you forgot about this, you forgot about that. We're not going over like every team that won the World Series, but really we're just kind of talking about these eras and going how the game evolved and becomes America's pastime, or this major part of the Americana that it is today.
Generally speaking, 1930s, you have a lot of hitters. That's the game changes. They move the stands closer. The crowds love seeing home runs. Great Depression actually puts a little damper in all this. They said that the peak average of attendance pre-Great Depression, like late 20s, was 8,000, a little over 8,000. Great Depression kind of really minimizes that, and it falls below 5,000, which actually is the reason we have the All-Star Game. So in 1933, the numbers were so low for people going to see baseball games that they created the All-Star Game. It was like a mid-season break, in which they basically, it's in the name, right? They put the greatest players together from each league, and then they play against each other. And it was a meaningless demonstration game, but there was the idea of kind of trying to bring more people into the stands, right? And also in 1936, that is when you have the creation of the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. And you have the first 5 players. Do you know who the first 5 players are?
I know it's Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb. Who else you got there?
Walter Johnson, Honus Wagner.
Honus Wagner, that's the name people are going to realize. The most valuable baseball card. Because
Really?
He was against tobacco. Well, he was against tobacco, smoking and chewing tobacco. So he used to get baseball cards at that time, before the era when it was in like bubble gum and stuff like that. You'd get them in these tobacco cards and these tobacco packs. And he was like, I don't want kids buying tobacco packs to get my card. So he had his cards destroyed or refused to let them selling it. And that's why there's only very few Honus Wagner cards in existence. They're the most expensive baseball cards because of that.
That's kind of cool. Yeah, and the other one was Christopher Mathewson, right? Big Six, yes. The Christian Gentleman, or the Matty, the Gentleman's Hurler, they was known as, who played 17 seasons with the New York Giants. But yeah, those are the first ones. So the hall formally opened in 1939, and it remains open to this day. So World War II. This is interesting. That's a cool story, I think, World War II, right?
Well, again, this could be a podcast in itself, but you have more than 500 major leaguers and 37 future Hall of Famers actually served in military during this time. And the big thing is Roosevelt wants them to do that. He's not saying,
yeah, this is cool. This is a cool story.
A lot of them are sacrificing their prime years of their careers, but he's also saying, listen, he writes something known as the Green Light Letter. He encourages play to continue because he says baseball is a necessary moral booster during difficult times. So it's basically, it's part of Americana. It is America's pastime by this point. We need people to still watch and play baseball because it's going to keep morale up. It gives people an escape for a couple hours.
Yep. And it was interesting because initially, the baseball commissioner asked him, what do you want to do? Should we stop playing baseball? And it's a trying time. It's World War II. Players gone. And as you said, he's like, no, you got to keep them playing. He did have one request, though, and he asked that games should be played at night so that way all the workers that are working in the factories, right, in World War II could attend these games, which I thought was kind of cool. Also, this is the time where 1941, you have the premature death of Lou Gehrig. Also, during the same season in 41, Pearl Harbor is about to happen in December. World War II is around the corner. Joe DiMaggio hits successfully in 56 consecutive games.
Which was busting out the facts.
Which is, apparently this is an accomplishment that was unprecedented.
It's a record that still stands today, yeah.
Really? That I did not know. But yes. I did when I was looking it up, and they're like, Joe DiMaggio starts like when World War I starts. I was like, all right, it seems like a big deal.
Joe DiMaggio, and he's part of songs too. That guy, I guess we can talk about Joe DiMaggio a little bit, right? I'm sure you heard Mrs. Robinson, that song, right? He's part of Americana. And that Simon and Garfunkel, they're the one that see that song?
Yep.
Yeah, so I remember they mentioned that at first, Joe DiMaggio, he was like this, he's not the nicest guy in the world, but we'll get to him, I guess, more when we talk to the 50s because he was married to Marilyn Monroe. You have like the athlete with the movie star, right? First like it couple, right? Before J-Lo and A-Rod, but they're not together anymore. But you know what I mean?
Nope.
That sort of stuff. But he was actually contemplating suing them
So with who?
because he thought he suing Simon and Garfunkel. He thought they were making fun of him
Really?
in that song until they had to explain to him, no, they're saying like, where are you, Joe DiMaggio? A nation turns its lonely eye to you. That's like they're saying, no, where are our morals? Where are our heroes of our youth? He thought they were like
Yeah.
mocking him. So he was like a very on his image and stuff like that.
You know what's interesting too that with regards to that, because where are you, Joe DiMaggio? I mean, he wound up missing playing time. So 41 lead up to
Him,
U.S.
Ted
entrance in
Williams,
World
yeah,
War.
they were in the
Yeah,
war.
they had
they
to
were in the war.
go.
Like these are the prime years of their career. Yeah.
Exactly. Like in 41, everyone's like, "Oh my gosh!" Like Joe DiMaggio is going to be the next big thing, and then boom, he gets drafted, and that's pretty much the end of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
So they also have,
he still becomes a big thing. But
yeah,
it just
yeah.
takes a little. It's just he's
Well, so
doing another
baseball,
big thing.
indeed, right? Baseball really takes off after World War II. In 1945, this a new attendance record is established, and basically average crowds went up like 70% from pre-World War II time. So it really kind of starts, and then you have new records for crowds in 48 and 49, and the average size of the audience reaches about 16,900. So by today's standards, you're like, all right. But back then, stemming from 1939 when it was like 4,000, and all of a sudden World War II ends in 45, by 48, 49 it's 16,000. That's kind of a big deal. And then it kind of starts to dip a little bit, I feel like, afterwards. In the 50s and 60s, based on these numbers, it dips and then stems.
Well, baseball is so widely popular, but what you're doing is that it's going out west. There's going to be a lot of
We'll
changes.
get to
So
that, yeah.
The post-war years in baseball. But I guess before we skip that, we have to also mention that in the war years, you also had the female baseball league, the all women's baseball league, that comes around during that time, and it really put in place to compensate for loss of many of the best major league players in the war effort. Obviously, there's that
movie.
Tom Hanks movie,
Hanks
right?
movie.
Tom Hanks was down a league of their own.
Yeah.
It lasts for a number of years. Obviously, when the war is
It lasted
over,
until 54 it ended. It was 43 to 54.
it's not a good run, and they are recognized at the Baseball Hall of Fame, I believe, too. Those individuals. So it's an interesting story out there.
It is. I mean,
like
600 women, like 600 women played in the league. Right?
It was popular. No, it was popular. People enjoyed it. It was baseball.
It was baseball. It was mostly Midwest, though. It was 10 teams, and they were mostly in American Midwest. But yeah, they said that the 48 league attendance peaked at 900,000 in the calendar year of 48.
Yeah, so it was popular, without a doubt.
Yeah, but good point. Trying to like almost make up for the fact, just like women went into becoming plumbers and electricians and working in factories and building warships, they also went to play baseball.
Yep.
Yeah. So great story. And I think, like it's also stemming, kind of going from this whole like women's rights stuff. Let's get into racial integration in baseball, because that becomes a thing.
After World War II. Well, yeah, that's what we've seen again, World War II. And, they were basically.
We briefly mentioned it in the last podcast, but let's talk about it. Yeah.
They're fighting for freedom. African Americans are fighting for freedom against the Nazis, right? They're fighting for the country. They're coming back and they're like, this doesn't make much sense. Now I don't have, the same freedoms or that I was fighting for, saying I was going to have. So you start seeing this integration partly during this time. And during the baseball winter meetings, I think in 1943, there was a lot of push for integration of the sport, but it didn't happen again until after World War II. Everyone's kind of saying, we'll do it, but not till after World War II. Now, there were the Negro Leagues. Everyone knows the Negro League hearing about, and they had those World Series, stuff like that. But they said, no, we want players in baseball. No more segregation, right? It's getting rid of the segregation basically in baseball.
Do you notice that at first they try to pass some African American players as Native Americans to try to get them in? Before officially they were like, all right, no, we're going to make this work. So you have Pittsburgh Pirates owner, right? Signs Josh Gibson to a contract in 43. Yeah, the general manager who basically became the most successful in breaking the color barrier, right, was Branch Rickey of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And what he did is in mid-40s, he starts going and watching different games in a Negro League, and he compiles a whole list of possible players that he could bring over or that could be brought over to major league contracts. I kind of mentioned this a little bit in the last podcast last week, but the idea here was that whoever they did sign was going to basically be a magnet for prejudice, right, and racism. So the idea was, Rickey kind of went out there and says, we need to find a player that is distinguished, has a distinguished personality and character as much as the ability to play baseball. The player had to be able to tolerate this inevitable abuse. So that's how they settled on Jackie Robinson, right, who was a shortstop for the Kansas City Monarchs. Again, not the best player in the Negro League by any means, but the right character and the right personality.
Yeah, well, they also told me, so like if you ever watched the movie 42, which deals with that, he's basically told for the first couple of years you have to like just turn the other cheek, Later on, he starts to trip back, which is good. You should be able to set up for yourself.
Yeah.
So he actually starts April 15th, 1947, and then
Minor
11
leagues, though,
weeks
right?
later.
Doesn't he start minor leagues first?
Technically, yes, but he does make his debut for the Dodgers
In 47, yeah. In 46,
Yeah,
they get him playing some minor leagues. The Montreal Royals. They're like, all right, this
yeah.
is just kind of dip your toes, right?
And then just 11 weeks later, on July 5th, 1947, is when the American League integrates with Larry Doby of the Cleveland Indians. So you start to get, again, it's only a few players per team. Satchel Paige eventually goes also to the Indians. He's probably a famous Negro League player that people have heard of before. He was old at that time too, but still effective. And you start to get integration, but it's very slow. By 1953, you only had 6 of the 16 teams had African American players on the roster.
Yep, I saw that.
So,
right.
Yeah, and the Red Sox are actually the last major league team to integrate its roster in 1959.
Yep. They said, though, that even though they were limited in numbers, African Americans' like on-field performance was just outstanding. In the 14 years
they changed the game a little bit,
yeah, from 1947 until 1960, so from the first integration until 1960, black players won one or more of the Rookie of the Year awards 9 times, which is like unprecedented.
We also have to remember a lot of these players, they've played in other leagues. They had experience. They were rookies in the major league, right? But they weren't necessarily rookies to – well, no one's rookie to the game of baseball, but they weren't rookies to like that type of competition,
Yep.
So coming in, I'm not downplaying it, but I'm saying they had some experience. So obviously coming in, they were great players. So
yep. And also apparently a lot of credit is given to African American players of kind of changing and de-emphasizing the predominance of power hitting and speed, more towards base running and speed. Yep. So, but yeah, no, African American participation in baseball rose a lot, obviously, right? By 74, 27% of baseball players were African American. Also, this also opens up a lot of doors for Latin American players that wind up getting in as well because of this integration. But yeah. All right.
So it does go up, but nowadays, you want to get to nowadays a little bit just to talk about it. Yeah. Like African Americans make up only about 9% of the major league players. There's a lot of factors for that. I guess we'll talk about later, or we can talk about.
You want to do it now? Go.
Well, it's basically one. There is a lot more, like you said, Latin American players that's over about 30%, right? In 2007, 2017. But a lot of other factors. The instance says that, like Dave Winfield, he's a Hall of Fame player. He said that, listen, in urban America, where a lot of African Americans grow up, like there's fewer resources for youth baseball. So so that's one reason why you're not seeing as high. It is up, I think, around 10% and stuff like that. So but it's not what it was, obviously, many years ago. There's a lot of programs now trying to get it back, trying to get these like areas that may not have as much money and stuff, the funding, so they can play baseball. But it's also there's more sports for people to play too. It used to be you were baseball. It was a league or nothing. But if you look, you have kids now. Just look at all the different youth programs out there: soccer, lacrosse, football, basketball. So
but the cost of these things is ridiculous. I mean, ESPN did a whole piece on this. Kids aren't playing enough sports. Like like corporate cost. It just costs way too much money. And I mean, in 2018, only 30% of kids aged 6 to 12 played sports on a regular basis, right? So 38% of 6 to 12-year-olds, what you would think would play a lot of sports. That was down 45% from 2008. Like, just kids are not playing. And the reason for it is because everything is so expensive. So the ESPN compiled this.
Esports, Pete. They're all going to esports. They want esports scholarships.
That's what it is. They want to play video games. But average annual spending, right, per sport, per child, average, right? Baseball, average annual spending for baseball from a kid that's 6 to 12 years old. So we're not talking high school, I'm going to get a scholarship. I'm talking a 7-year-old, let's say, right? Is $659 to play baseball, average cost. Field hockey, $2,124. And then, you said ice hockey, right? Ice hockey is $2,582 average for a child between 6 and 12 per year in America to play that sport. Like, that is crazy. African Americans it's not like they're not playing baseball. It's just because of the fact that the costs are so high, and the statistics prove that a lot of African American children don't have the money or the right means to really partake in these organized sports. I think it's a detriment, to not just the kids, but also to the sport itself. But let's kind of come back real quick. So what we have here, let's kind of get into Major League Baseball relocates, really, in the 50s and 60s, right? It's time.
Yeah, so they start moving west. They start moving west, right?
All right,
So
so
you already had something called the Pacific Coast League, right? It was already there. You had a bunch of players there. It's actually where a lot of Joe DiMaggio started there. So a lot of players would start there. They would move their way and stuff like that to other places. And but what you're seeing is like an actual league. So you start seeing some teams start to relocate. The Boston Braves move to Milwaukee, right? The same, some other teams there in
yep.
that go. The Philadelphia Athletics move to Kansas City, right? And they become the Royals and stuff like that. But the biggest one of the bigger ones, is probably when in 1958,
Yep, New
where
York.
the Dodgers and the Giants both leave.
And the thing is,
So that's
because the fear was that the PCL, right, that the
Pacific,
Pacific League was going to start its own league, and it's like, wait,
its
we
own
can't
league.
do that. We need to, like, we can't allow them to do that. So that was the whole idea of, all right, how can we place some
Yeah.
teams
And they were offered a lot
from
of
the
money.
East,
Walter
West,
O'Malley on
yep,
the Dodgers was offered a lot of money to go over.
to move to LA? And it basically, apparently, Los Angeles basically gave Walter O'Malley, right, the owner of the
Yeah,
Dodgers, they gave him a helicopter
yeah.
tour in the city, and they're like,
Like,
pick a
pick your
spot.
spot. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to be?
It's so crazy.
And this
He's like,
creates a lot of rivalry. The Dodgers and Giants, they still have. So basically, they both left because the Yankees was outdrawing both of
crowds.
them,
Yeah, that's what
and
I.
they
Yeah, I got.
obviously they were becoming dominant in the town in the 50s, and because they were winning the World Series virtually every year, so everyone was going to be a Yankee fan. All the immigrants coming in, what are they doing to be a Yankee fan? So they were, they needed these new markets. They had baseball people. A lot of people, that lived even in the East Coast moved to the West Coast at this point, right? So they were starving for baseball. Let's bring baseball to the West Coast.
Yeah, and this is also the first Major League Baseball expansion in 70 years. So the first expansion team, the only California expansion team really at that time, was the Los Angeles Angels, right? Later the California Angels. And eventually, I think 2005, they were the LA Angels of Anaheim,
Anaheim,
right?
yeah.
Anaheim. Yeah.
Now that the LA Angels again, yeah, they
Yep.
changed it back.
But yeah, that was like the first Major League Baseball expansion after the Dodgers and Giants were brought over to California. So what else we have? We have the expansion of American League and Kansas City Royals, right? I mean, it's just basically, I would say the
A lot of
1960s
more teams come. Yeah, more
is
teams are
just
coming.
expansion.
Well, yeah, because they have to keep up. So
Yeah.
to keep pace, right? The American League, which now had 10 teams, the National League needed to expand also to 10 teams. So they add two new teams, the Houston Colt 45s, which become the Houston Astros, and the New York Mets. They come, and the Mets have the colors of the two previous teams, right? The blue from the Dodgers, the orange from the Giants. That's how you get the Mets colors. So they come into place. And then in 1969, you have the Royals, the Seattle Pilots. They later become the Mariners. So you have all these teams that are slowly popping up, the Expos, the Padres.
I mean, they settle. They
next 4
settle on
years.
the 15th. They settle on 15 teams on each side. 1998, right? The American League and National League. They each added the 15th team, so there was a total of 30 teams in Major League Baseball, right? And I'm pretty sure that's where we're at today, isn't it?
Well, yeah, the last teams I believe are added in '98 when you have the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, now just the Rays. You have the Diamondbacks in Arizona, a couple other teams that do get put in there. You have all these expansion teams, and the expansions happen when they're trying to grow the game. I don't think
Yeah.
they're not planning any future expansion teams anytime soon. You don't want to oversaturate it, but it's as the sport gets more popular, you want to continue to expand. That's what they even do now when they play games in Japan. They plan on playing games in Mexico. They want to play games in Europe. That was a big thing a couple years ago. See, COVID put a stop to some of that, but it's playing these
Yeah.
games overseas that try to like spread the game and get other people interested. Like World Baseball Classics, another example of that. It's kind of like the World Cup for baseball. Not as
Yeah.
popular. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
but they're trying to get the game more international.
And also, 1980s, really, this is the marketing and hype era and science of sports kind of changing the game, right? Free agency, players are moving. You start having star players, basically. Sports science conditioning, so players are getting better ultimately at the game. But marketing and television broadcasts, sporting events, prime time on TV. You have brand name products and greater visibility, like Yankees. Like just New Jersey alone, right? You are middle northern Jersey, you're going to see Yankee and Mets gear. You get further south Jersey, you're going to see Phillies. It's
It's
just
well, you
like
have the whole regional
just
baseball teams, the regional
brand
baseball
name. Yeah,
networks that
just
you're
brand
seeing,
name.
stuff like that. It's branding. They learned pretty early on, I guess, during the time of Ruth, but definitely during the time of DiMaggio, Mantle, some of those other players that come later on, like Carlos Shrimsky. Like, I think people like that's we can market the players. You can also market just the teams, like the merchandise.
And TV has
You know,
so much to do with this. The arrival of TV, right, in 1950s basically increases attention for revenue from all the major league clubs. Very regional television programming. The only baseball game I could watch is a New York Yankee game. Like, I'm going to be more inclined to become New York Yankees fan. Like that's, there was national networks that started showing televised national games, like a national game of the week in the 60s and 70s. But, it was still kind of remained and was primarily TV geared towards a given, what do you call it? Region, right?
region. Yeah, well,
Cable
again, it
kind
was
of,
having Northeast in the 50s
yeah,
too, as we
cable
said
kind of
before.
changes that in the 70s, I guess you would say. But, that's also like in the 70s, you have obviously just all sports because of television, right? Cable makes television national, in a sense that you could follow teams that are not in your market, eventually on demand and all that other stuff. But so TV, huge in marketing and hyping up baseball. Actually, the average attendance first broke 20,000 in 1979 and then 30,000 in 1993. So baseball becomes very popular in the 80s. I would say the 80s and 90s,
Well, and
right?
what they're doing is that at times they're also trying to get more runs per game. We talked before, like in the 60s, 69, they actually reduced the pitcher mound. They lowered it,
Yep.
and they reduced the strike zone. In 73, the American League put in the designated hitter. The National League finally just did that now, put in the designated hitter, which means the pitcher wouldn't hit.
Yep.
Yeah, it doesn't would just hit. They're trying to increase offense and stuff like that. But really, what you're seeing the explosion with all that revenue is that the players are saying, we want more money too. And the first legal challenge of that comes when Kurt Floyd, right, took the
Yep.
leagues to court and negotiated a player trade, saying,
Flood
"Listen,
versus Kuhn, 1972.
yeah, well, yeah, well, flooding, yeah, Floyd tries to Flood. I'm sorry, tries that. He lost, right?
Yep.
Because he tried arguing the 13th Amendment. Then you have other ones later on, and they eventually win. And it basically allows free
let's talk
agency,
about
which
yeah,
skyrockets the prices.
of course. And that also leads to players also signing different deals with, trading cards and companies and again,
Endorsements. Well, even had that, like
endorsements.
Babe Ruth had endorsements for like different things, and cigarettes. Even a lot of them would
Yeah.
do cigarettes.
It's crazy.
Beer. I know there used to be this show called Home Run Derby that I would watch like reruns on, like classic sports, and they would literally have like these, Mickey Mantle, all these guys trying to hit who could hit the most home runs and stuff like that, and then they'd be like doing advertisements for like beer and cigarettes and stuff like that in between. And they were like, "Listen, they're paying me $5,000 to say I smoke Marlboro Lights." Okay, you know what I mean?
Yep.
That wouldn't fly today. But back
No,
in
no.
1956, 1960s, yeah, go for it. But
And I think that also brings up players having a lot more say, have a lot more power within their team. So I think this is a good time to talk about strikes. I mean, there was a strike in 72, 73, 80. But those are all held in preseason. There was some stoppage, I think, in 72 that disrupted the season. And then in 76, the owners locked out players out of the spring training in a dispute over free agency. But I think that one of the biggest ones was 94, 95,
well,
right?
that's the biggest one because even the other ones, they had reduced seasons. So the one that happened in 81 had like a reduced season and stuff like that, but they still had a World Series winner.
Yeah.
In 94, you did not have one.
And 85, wasn't there a 2-day strike in 85 over a division of television revenue money because the TV was making so much money? But yeah, so this the 32-day spring training lockout in 1990, that was a thing. But so what happened in 94? Do you remember?
It was basically there was a strike. Well, I was 12, but it was basically it was it was the end of the it was over salary and structure and everything like that.
Yep.
And the worst, it was by far the worst ones. They tried to renegotiate salary for free agency in 92. They didn't really do much. And the standoff continued until 1994 when it would actually end in the middle of the season when no agreement would take place. So out of the conflict was that these small market teams, let's say like the Mariners, they couldn't compete with like the New York teams or the LA teams.
Yeah.
So their plan was to institute the revenue sharing, right, to increase equality among all of them and impose a salary cap. No players want a salary cap because that's going to limit how much money they can make, right? They don't want a salary cap, so it could reduce their potential earnings. So it wasn't until 2003, actually, when Major League Baseball put in a luxury tax, which is what they still have now. But it was the first time since 1904 the World Series was actually canceled. And I remember it was like mid-season. They were playing, and all of a sudden, all right, the season's over. There's still always talk about the season's going to come back on, but it just never did. And it was a real embarrassment for baseball, and fans were mad. Again, I was young, but I do remember it. A lot of people were really like angry about this, and they said, "Listen, we're not going back." And attendance actually suffered a lot during this time. And when baseball came back in '95, it would take more than a decade for it to fully recover. You had a couple of things that changed it. You had the Cal Ripken Jr., right? He breaks Lou Gehrig's consecutive game streak, so that starts. You have the home run race, really, even though we'd find out later on that in the 1998 home run race was fueled by steroids, basically.
And I think that's
But
important
not
because,
people
that
show
kind of
that.
the steroid.
Well, steroids to steroid,
scandal.
and baseball knew that. They looked away from it
Yep.
because they're like, well, fans are coming back to it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So,
But I think the steroid era really tainted baseball in the early 2000s. Like the 90s, from the 95 on strike, it seemed like baseball couldn't really catch a break. The steroid era, I feel like, tarnished a lot of it. And that became, the talk of the town it wasn't like the rec steroids. Wasn't it like...
it was they had the steroids in the early 90s. You had
They call it
like
designer
80s and stuff.
steroids.
You had them with like Jose Canseco and stuff like that. He was basically doing steroids. So you had the steroids in that time. But yeah, it was like Andro and stuff like that.
It was designer steroids. So they were clear and they were not necessarily detected through drug tests at a time. So, these players were taking these steroids, but also that like the obsession with home runs because there were so many powerful players in the early 2000s.
Well, it was a big thing. You would watch it all the time and you would be like, oh, who's going to win this race? Mark McGwire or Sammy Sosa. Had a home run race between these two players, right? And Sosa ends up with 66 home runs and McGwire ends up with 70, which is like unheard of. Remember, the record was 61. Right, and they're hearing more of them.
Like routinely, players today, even right, the 2000s reach 40 to 50 home runs in a season, and that was basically rare in 1980s. So look how much has changed in the past just 20 years. So I mean, I guess the 2000s kind of brings us to today, and pretty much, I guess, brings us to the end of this podcast because I feel like between the two parts, I think we did a pretty good overview of the history of baseball.
Obviously, we missed a lot of things, but this is just like a brief overview, give you a little bit of baseball IQ, I guess, right?
And I think we'll pick another sport one of these days, maybe. Until then, right, Tom?
We'll do fencing.
We should do fencing. Anyway. If anyone needs to contact us, guys, please feel free to do so. We do appreciate you tuning in every single week. It's awesome. Thank you. You can find us at www.historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com. If you have any questions, comments, reactions, anything, just, find us there. And I guess till next week, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in once more. Take care.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.
A BetterHelp ad. Therapy isn't just for times of major challenge. It's a valuable tool for anyone wanting to improve their well-being. It can help you develop healthy coping skills, set boundaries, and support personal growth. BetterHelp makes it easy to get matched online with a fully licensed therapist right from your phone. No commuting, no waiting rooms. And you can switch therapists at any time. Sign up at BetterHelp.com and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com.